Okay, welcome to WACO, Water Advisory Committee of Orange County. I'd like to call Council Member John Collins to lead us on the Pledge of Allegiance.
As we say these 31 words, think about what they mean to you in your life, because we've been reciting them since grammar school, and we just don't think of what the words really mean. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, John. I'd like to call anybody who is here for the first time. Raise your hand and please let us know who you are so we can recognize you in the future.
Nice to meet everyone. My name is Chase McWhorter. I'm with Publication Institutional Investing in Infrastructure. I'm here just to learn more about water as an infrastructure asset. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Chase. Anybody else has any promotion, election, re-election, recall? Well, nobody? I'd like to invite then our favorite director, Linda Ackerman, to give us the state of the Met.
Good morning. I asked Jose if I could be first because I have to hustle to another meeting. I see a lot of you here that were there last night, and I said to somebody, we should have just spent the night here. Maybe next time we'll set up cots. It is spring, and in spring, most of you probably don't pay attention. I have terrible allergies, so I always have a tissue, and I can't see through all the blur. Well, I am off the hook this morning. I just told Brandon I sat down to write my report, and I had a couple of pages on the Cal WaterFix, and I thought, what the heck am I doing? We've got the best guy here. Where are you, Brandon?
Right there. I'm right here up front.
Oh, there you are, right there. Okay. Brandon is one of my very favorites. He tells me he likes my questions. Nobody likes my questions. I was gonna keep the report short. It's sort of short, but quickly. We had a very short budget workshop. I think it was our third at the end of March. We will continue that discussion when we go back Tuesday and Wednesday, and hopefully we will have a budget. We will have a budget, I'm convinced, in April, and I'll keep you up to date on that. In addition, last month at Water Planning and Stewardship, we talked briefly about our state water project allocation, which has not changed. We are expecting another atmospheric river, as most of you have heard, up north this weekend, but we were supposed to get rain down here too, and that's being erased, so who knows what's going to happen. We will be implementing, and Brandon will probably have to correct me, Wisdom Action Plans. That's our water supply demand management program. Due to a small shortage of water from last year, we delivered 382,000 acre-feet of state water project water and 925,000 acre-feet of water from the Colorado River. That's not quite what we delivered, so we draw from dry year storage, and we take some other flexibility operational actions, and we continue to pursue water transfers and exchanges. And on that note, we did approve an agreement with the state water contractors to pursue 2018 Sacramento Valley water transfer supplies. This is U-Bar-Court groundwater supplies that are negotiated annually. We authorized MET to make a $5 per acre deposit that secures participation in a purchase. Unused funds are refunded based on actual costs. We also had at this committee an information item on conservation modifications and additions to our conservation program. This was a lively discussion covering a lot of different conservation issues. We talked about regional landscape transformation, a regional transformation program, a professional landscape program for contractors, a one-year residential pilot program that would include back and front yard rebates. This would be based on market-based incentives. We also had an information item on a proposed future supply action funding program within the Water Research Foundation. There would be two elements to this. One would be potable reuse studies at a cost of $1 million, and the second would be member agency studies at a cost of $3.5 million. I didn't take very good notes on that because I had to step aside to have a discussion with someone. I remember that distinctly, but I thought I would just give you that tidbit, and we'll talk about that more later. Quick update on the Colorado River. Lake Mead experienced, and poor Bill Hazenkamp, by the time we get to his report, we're always short of time, so he just delivers a quick report with just important highlights. The important highlight is, and this is a sad one, Lake Mead actually experienced a 30-foot drop in the last year. We're still not in trouble. Well, we're in trouble because we're in an 18-year drought on the river, but the lower basin states as well as the upper basin states are still working, and particularly us, on a drought contingency plan agreement along the river. And you've heard a lot about that, and we still haven't finalized that. At the Communication and Legislation Committee, staff presented an action item asking for a support on SB 5, which was authored by Senator Kevin De Leon. This is a $4 billion, this is after our, $7.1 billion Prop 1, general obligation bond measure that will appear as a proposition number 68 on the June ballot. This is billed as money for state and local parks, environmental protection and restoration, water infrastructure and flood protection projects. There's also money in this bond for the Salton Sea, which is primarily why a lot of water people support this bond. It also reallocates millions of dollars from bond money that's been unused. That always sounds fishy to me. I don't know about you. This item did pass at the board. Your Met directors, including me, voted no on this particular bond issue. The board, including your Met directors, did vote to pass AB 2050. Some of you here were last night and you heard about that. That is by Caballero from Salinas, which would be a vehicle to help consolidate and improve water delivery to the disadvantaged communities who are receiving contaminated water. In addition, existing compliant public water systems can also join these systems on a voluntary basis. This would bring some of these agencies together. They don't have to be contiguous. It would save everybody a lot of money, and there would be much more ability to deliver good, clean water. This bill actually was sponsored by Eastern Municipal Water District and California Municipal Water Districts across the state. If you come to our P&L meeting where we discussed legislation, Paul Cook came and did a really good presentation on this particular bill. You can probably pick that up online. I know you can pick it up online. I'm sorry, Paul Jones. Did I say that? Is that Pierre? Good morning, Pierre. Okay. And now for my water fact. Now, I wasn't here last month, but the month before last I was here, and I had a water fact. And I don't see him in the audience, but there were a few people who thought it was not a very good water fact. So I hope this one is better. Did you know that raindrops are not tear-shaped at all? They actually resemble the shape of a tiny hamburger bun. Can you imagine how many water agencies out there are now going to have to change their logos?
Now with the Aqua report, Kathy Green. Thank you.
Good morning. No surprise to you. My first item is about the trailer bill on the water tax on drinking water. We are taking very strong action as opposing this, as well as SB 623, which is the Monning Bill, which is the water fee bill. Right now, everything is on hold. I have given you, I left out a drinking water tax fact sheet, and also a sample letter if anybody would send in a letter of support. Both of these bills put a tax on our drinking water to help disadvantaged communities. WACO has said that we do not need or want a tax. Instead, we're advocating for a package of funds, some that is comprised of federal, state drinking water funds, our general obligation funds, assessments related to nitrate, and also the rest of the money for the out of the general fund. All of us want to make sure that people, whether they're disadvantaged or not, are drinking safe water. That's not what the opposition is. The opposition is strictly on the tax, which we are absolutely opposed. I hope all of you will support us in that. We have a campaign kitty that we're starting to move forward, and if you'll look on our website, you'll find some of the toolkits. They're not quite ready, or at least they weren't Friday, so you'll be able to see those and use that information. That's for all of your use. Please use it. Another big item is, as most of you know, Tim Quinn has decided to retire by the end of the year. So WACO has decided to do a nationwide search. If you know anyone, if you're interested, please apply. Please let us know your qualifications. It's a big board, I'll admit, but we do good things, and it's a statewide organization. Another thing that it'll be a little different. We'll be selecting the assistant executive director, who will then, as Tim takes steps down, will take his seat, and then that director can appoint his own COO. So we're going to change our structure a bit. We've had 2 assistant executive directors, and we're going to go to 1 and more a COO. So that's a big thing. And then also Assemblywoman Rubio came and spoke to us. She spoke almost 40 minutes. I have never had a speaker come and speak that long, but everybody was interested. She is carrying a bill on giving conservation credit. The Region 10, which is San Diego and Orange County, that I'm chair of, feels very, very strongly that we should get credit for our conservation efforts with the groundwater replenishment, and San Diego for their desalination project. We are fighting for 30%. Don't know if that's pie in the sky, but it's certainly much better than the 10% that some, or 8% that some were proposing. So hopefully you'll support us on that. It was really Region 10 who pushed that, but at state ledge, we got the vote to go forward on that. So WACO will actively be proposing and pushing for that. And then another thing, I just want to brag a little bit about our assistant general manager. Mike Weiner. If you saw in the Aqua News, he was given the award of the Recycled Water Advocate of the Year by Water Reuse California Board at the 2018 annual conference. It's much deserved. He has 40 years of experience and leadership, all of it in recycled water quality. He certainly made huge contributions to our district. He oversees and looks at the water quality for our groundwater replenishment, and even going back to Water Factory 21. He's the one that helped establish the scientific rigor and transparency to instill public policy. Remember when groundwater replenishment came on, it was not a popular idea throughout the state. LA said no way, San Diego said no way, and thank goodness we did not. And we would have been hard-pressed getting through the drought without our groundwater replenishment. So I just want to remind you of a couple of meetings. Well, the big one is really our conference, May, I think it's 8th through 10th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, I think. It's close to that. Look on the website. And the new Department of Water Resources Director, Carla Nemeth, will be a keynote speaker. And the California Water Commission Water Storage Investment Program, that's on Prop 1, public meetings are April 24th and 25th. The Commission will talk about the revised public benefit ratios for public storage. Remember, we had several 12 water storage programs that we thought were going to go forward, and the Commission decided no, none of them passed mustard for Prop 1. So that money is just sitting there, and we're going right back into a drought. So I hope people will really speak out on this. It's a really important issue for all of California. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. The Aqua conference is from the 7th to the 11th, Monday to Friday. Well, this seems to be the month of California WaterFix. 2 days ago, we heard in this room Metropolitan's general manager speaking to us about the California fix. He answered all the questions really nicely, but there were some difficult questions, and he referred that to his experts. He said, ask the experts at Metropolitan. So we decided to bring the expert today, so to ask those questions. The expert that we invited today is Brandon Goshi, who manages the unit that does the strategy, long-term strategy and water resources and planning for Metropolitan Water. Brandon has been with Metropolitan for over 24 years, and he came from DWP, from Los Angeles Department of Water and Power initially, so he is not new to the water. But he has been in all the key positions at Metropolitan, from setting your water rates to doing the integrated resource plan to moving into strategies to develop more resources. And this is an internal secret, but his unit is thought to be formed by the smartest people at Metropolitan, so he doesn't want to brag about it, but I do know that. These are people who has a lot of brain power to develop strategies, think long-term for the region. So he is a true manager of long planning. To speak about those difficult issues and to clarify any question that you may have, we have invited Brandon to talk about the California WaterFix. Brandon?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Let's see. Thanks, Heather. All right. Yes, Jose just said there's a lot of activity, a lot of things going on with regard to California WaterFix. And, you know, as he said, I've been at Metropolitan about 24 years, and we've been talking about having improvements to the state water project and in the Delta, and that's really what California WaterFix is. We've been talking about that the whole time that I've been there and even longer. So for today, what I want to do is go over the activities that have been going on at Metropolitan's board, and the discussion statewide with regard to how California WaterFix, that project for the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project, could be implemented going forward. So today I'll talk about the board action that was taken in October of 2017. I'll talk about an allocation of costs and benefits between the participating public water agencies. I'll talk about this concept of alternative financing for full project implementation. That'll make more sense when I get to it, I suppose. And I'm also going to touch on the different areas of agreements that need to be made as part of implementing the California WaterFix in order to make it a functional statewide project where benefits follow costs and the payers of those costs. And then I'll touch on the upcoming board action that's coming actually this Tuesday at Metropolitan's board regarding our positions on WaterFix. So wanted to start because I understand that some folks are new to water, particularly I heard this gentleman this morning, right? You picked a heck of a time to step into a meeting if you're going to learn about water. So Metropolitan Water District, we're a wholesaler for Southern California. We have 26 member agencies that cover a 5,200 square mile area over 6 counties in Southern California. There's about 19 million people in our service area. And we have a 38-member board of directors who represent our 26 agencies. And that representation on our board is basically set by the relative assessed land value, property tax value around the service area. The region itself serves about 3.7 million acre feet. 1 acre. I grabbed this from something that I did for Canada. So, just as a water fact, 1 acre foot is 1.2 megaliters of water. So, okay, so moving on. Sources of water for Southern California. You know, this is really important because I think it shows the integration and the need for water development in all different areas for Southern California. And when I mean different areas, I mean different types of water development. So within the service area, there's, you know, what we always refer to as local supplies versus, say, imported supplies. Local supplies, particularly in Orange County, groundwater, surface water, recycled water, all of those sources, very important for meeting local needs. But those local needs, from the early 1900s, it was identified that would have to be supplemented to accommodate the growth that was being projected for Southern California. So in the early 1900s, the city of Los Angeles built the Los Angeles aqueduct system to the eastern Sierras, and you can see that there. Metropolitan itself was put together in 1930 basically to build the Colorado River Aqueduct and deliver water that originates from the upper Colorado River Basin in the Rocky Mountains. So those are the first two major imported supplies to help augment the local supplies, the groundwater and the surface water, recycled water. In the 1960s, Metropolitan became one of the 29 state water contractors and was responsible for financing and building a lot of the state water project. And that state water project, you can see, delivers water through the state, and that water comes from the Sierra Mountains, but through that highlighted area, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Bay Delta region. So 66% of the developed water for agriculture and urban uses flows through that California, Sacramento, San Joaquin Bay Delta region. And that's really the crux of what WaterFix is intended to address, improve, and stabilize. So in terms of the board action with regard to WaterFix, in October our board took a historic vote to support the California WaterFix project. And the California WaterFix project is a 9,000 CFS, a 9,000 cubic feet per second, twin tunnel intake and conveyance system to move water from the Sacramento River down to the existing pumping facilities for the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. So in that board action, our board overwhelmingly, I think it was two-thirds of the board, over two-thirds of the board voted in favor of adopting the CEQA determination for the project that the state had worked years and years, and you'll hear about this environmental documentation being, the tunnels themselves are 40 foot in diameter, and the stacks of environmental documentation is about 40 feet high, I think, if you stack it on each other. So our board authorized or supported participation in this statewide project at a 25.9% share of the total project costs, and looked to receive 25.9% of the benefits of that total project. Also authorized Metropolitan to enter into, and I'll touch on these in a little bit, some implementation organizations. So first one was a design and construction JPA. This was basically, the concept here is to have a joint project authority made up of the beneficiaries, the agencies that are paying for the project, to be primary oversight over the design and construction, as opposed to the state of California being the primary oversight there. A finance JPA, in which the financial wherewithal and oversight for all of the bond issuances and financial backing would be centered, and then an adaptive management program for the operation, developing the operations of the program. Since that time, a lot of activity has taken place, because again, Metropolitan, in approving support of 25.9%, that leaves a lot of the rest of the support and the financial commitments from other public water agencies for them to commit to as well. So after DWR approved the environmental documents in the project itself, the public water agencies, including Metropolitan, went through a discussion period with their boards to see whether or not they were going to support the project. And this included State Water Project contractors and Central Valley Project contractors. So as those public water agencies developed their financing options and their commitments, it was basically determined that full participation in the project wasn't going to be committed to. That the total number of public water agencies who would commit to the project, that funding wouldn't equal 100% of the funding that was required, funding commitments that would be required to implement that full project that was approved by DWR. In February of this year, in light of those commitments, or lack thereof, DWR announced that they would be looking into the option of staging the construction of the California WaterFix, so that the amount of financial commitment that they had would match that first stage of construction, and as future commitments of financing came in, the second stage of that project could be built. So instead of building a 9,000 CFS facility all at once, a first stage could be built first. We at Metropolitan staff brought this option to our board to discuss the different costs and benefits associated with a single stage, single first stage of the tunnels. And at that time, our board directed staff to also look at, because of the importance of the project to statewide environmental and water supply reliability benefits, look to see if there was an option whereby Metropolitan could offer financing to ensure that the entire project got done, as opposed to having a stage project getting done. What would be the impacts, and how would that work with all of the public water agencies and the project? So since that time, we've been looking at being able to do that, and we've had a workshop and several meetings with our board to discuss those options. So the main things that are coming up right now with regard to California WaterFix implementation and why we're having these discussions about whether or not we pursue a staged approach or whether we could look into building the entire project up front has to do with the participation, particularly on the Central Valley Project side. So the federal contractors, who are mostly agricultural entities, they have some issues, one, regarding financing, but second, regarding the way that the Central Valley Project distributes their costs and the water benefits to their contractors. It's different than the State Water Project. They have a different set of priority systems. Some of their uses have higher uses. They have some contractors known as the exchange contractors that have a higher right to water than some of the other agricultural water users. So in a nutshell, the improvements that would be due to the California WaterFix may not be accruing to those senior water rights holders because the current project that's there is enough to meet the needs of those senior water rights holders. So, kind of an old-style Western water rights, first in time, first in right, or the higher priority water users, their needs are going to get met first, and therefore they wouldn't have to pay for this. So that puts an undue burden on the remaining contractors, and that's really what is making it so that those remaining contractors couldn't commit financially to the California WaterFix. There's also been other discussions about the allocation of costs and benefits between the state water contractors or state water project and the Central Valley Project, and also within the state water contractors, whether or not some contractors who may be receiving or may have more value for the water due to California WaterFix, whether they could transfer some of those costs and benefits within the construct of the state water contract. So those are the implementation issues that have been we've been trying to work through. So one major change that happened since the October timeframe is this notion of how much the state water contractors in particular would be responsible for the total project. And so again, recall that I said in October, we talked to our board about the California WaterFix and that WaterFix being shared out financially and benefits-wise between the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project at approximately a 45-55% split, CVP to SWP. If the State Water Project was to assume responsibility for 55% of the project, that would mean for Metropolitan, because we're 47% of the state water contract, it would mean that Metropolitan would be picking up, and you can see down at the bottom here, 25.9% of the total project. That's kind of the relationship there of how we got to the 25.9%. Since that time, there's been further discussions about the water that would actually be moved through the tunnels themselves, and it was determined that the tunnels themselves would be used in more of a 2/3, 1/3 kind of mode, where the state water project would be moving more water through the tunnels. So you see over here on the left, the state water project, if it was going to see the benefits of the tunnels and then therefore have the costs follow that, would be responsible for about 67% of the costs of WaterFix and not 55% as it was discussed back in October. Well, what that would mean for Metropolitan is that in order to keep supporting the tunnels, we would have to pick up 31.6% as opposed to 25.9%. So that's one piece of information that was going to come back to our board to determine whether or not participation, because of this cost allocation, whether they supported that increase in the total share, right? That actually hasn't happened yet because we haven't had that decision point yet, but that's one thing that happened. And I'm going to apologize up front here. There's like 4 or 5 different moving pieces, and I'm going to try and define them, but forgive me if I'm not able to do that as clearly as I'd like to, but I'm certainly going to try. So that's the first piece. One thing to keep in mind with the overall California WaterFix with the 9,000 CFS facilities and the twin tunnels is the approximate water benefit that we think the total project will deliver. And I say the total project, and that's an important point here. The total project using the water rights and the facilities of both the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. Using that with California WaterFix, you can see here the water supply reliability benefits that we expect the project to provide. And so today you can see that those projects together can deliver about 4.7 million acre feet. That's the tall bar on the left. We also know, based on projections of regulations and actually real-life experience with these regulations that are there to protect fisheries and water quality, but they also have the impact of reducing the amount of water that can be exported by both projects, that we expect that without a physical fix to the facilities to be able to address these, that 4.7 will reduce to somewhere between 3.5 to 3.9 million acre feet. So that's a degradation or a loss, and that's similar to the losses that we've been seeing over time from these regulations. WaterFix at 9,000 CFS would be expected to restore supplies that would be lost without WaterFix back up to 4.7 to 5.3 million acre feet. So if you look at kind of the midpoint of the improvement of where we would be without WaterFix in the future to where we would be with WaterFix in the future for both projects, it's an improvement of about 1.3 million acre feet. That's what we kind of talk about as the total water supply reliability benefits, or the protection of water supply of 1.3 million acre feet. Another way to think about that is, if you didn't take steps to meet that reduction, you would have to develop alternative water supplies in about that same amount to meet the same kind of water reliability levels. So comparing water supplies for Metropolitan and the State Water Project, thank you. Is it starting to show? Now, you notice how he had to carry that over here? If there was 2 tunnels, I could have just got it. And that's really the thing with water supply. It's really not the supply, there's plenty of water. It's really the conveyance. You can see from this table how those water supplies trickle down to the state, the CVP, and ultimately to Metropolitan. So when we talked earlier about Metropolitan having 25.9% of that total, you can see that the 1.3 million acre feet of improvement is split between the CVP and the SWP 55-45 as it was prior to this to the change, and that would result in about 337,000 acre feet to Metropolitan in improved reliability. Under the new split 67-33, that would improve Metropolitan to about 410,000. So this is all still within the range of what we're seeking for water reliability from the Delta, but I just wanted to show that the water followed what would be the new cost allocation if this was the path that we pursued or went down. In terms of cost for WaterFix and the full shares, I just wanted to show that. So here's contrasting 25.9% and 31.6%, what the difference in cost to Metropolitan would be. So you can see that change in share would change Metropolitan's cost obligations for the full project. The full project's $16.9 billion, $4.3 billion under the old share at 25.9, $5.3 billion under the new share. So that would be an additional $1 billion of obligation that Met would pick up there. In terms of marginal cost for that supply, they're both the same, because all we're doing is shifting costs and benefits associated with it. $613 in the Delta. If we look at it in terms of being treated and delivered in our service area, and that's important because when we compare to local supply alternatives down in Southern California, we see some recycled water projects at $1,500 an acre foot, $1,600 an acre foot, or maybe some desalination projects. I think Carlsbad desalination is up at $2,400 or $2,500 an acre foot. That's directly comparable to that $840 an acre foot. So even at this cost, with that amount of water, those marginal costs are very favorable when you compare them to local supply options, even delivering and treating within our service area. In terms of cost increase to our budget, what does that $4.3 or $5.3 billion do? Well, the cost increase at the end of 15-year construction period, so the peak cost increase when we're paying all the bonds, would be about 13% on our rate, on our current rate, under 25.9%, or 16%, or 16% on our current rate at 31.6%. So when you look at it in terms of rate increases, a small differential between the two for the benefit that you're getting. On an annual basis over that 15 years, it would have been a little under a percent a year on the rate, or contributing to a little bit under percent a year on the rate, to now 1.1%. Okay, 1.1%. The cost per acre foot, and so you can kind of interpret this as what would be layered onto our existing rates. $122 an acre foot on our current rate is what it would feel like under 25.9%, or $148 per acre foot under the new share. Household costs, we calculated this out so that we could kind of see what the residential household on average would see in terms of monthly rate increases due to investment in WaterFix. Under a 25.9% share, $1.90 per month to residential households. Under a 31.6% share, $2.40 per month per household. So again, a small change when you get down to that level. And part of the reason why is because of the spread of the rate base in Southern California. So I'm now going to switch from that 9,000 CFS and that cost allocation to the discussion of a staged approach and what that means, okay, both in terms of what it is and what it costs and what the benefits are. So here is a graphic within the delta of what California WaterFix facilities would look like, and this is under the full project. So the full 9,000 CFS project would basically be comprised of, and I'm going to start up north on the Sacramento River here. So starting here, the project describes 3,000 CFS intakes, right? So 3 times 3 is 9,000 CFS worth of intake capacity that would go to an intermediate forebay to help control the pressure and the deliveries, then into 2 tunnels, the east tunnel and west tunnel. These would be the 40-foot diameter twin tunnels that would deliver water down to the SWP pumps and the CVP pumps down in the Clifton Court forebay down at the south end of the delta. So that's the project as described, with the addition of these east and west pumping plants that would be at our existing facilities down in Clifton Court. Okay? A staged approach to this, so the original design would be to construct this all at once over the next 15 years, right, and bring that online. The staged approach would basically retain or construct first these items that still stayed in blue. So 2 of the 3 intakes would be built, as described. Those would still go to the intermediate forebay. 1 tunnel, the east tunnel, would be built. That would go to 1 pumping plant down in Clifton Court, and that would be the project for the first stage. As additional financing commitments came in, then the second stage would be built, would be the 3rd intake there, the west tunnel and the west pumping plant. So looking at it that way and making some modern engineering modifications for this, instead of having 2 4,500 CFS tunnels, they would match the tunnel engineering so that 6,000 CFS of tunnel capacity could be used in the first stage to match the 6,000 CFS intake capacity of the first 2 pumping plants. So that would be the staged approach versus the full implementation of the project, okay? And that first stage would presumably happen within that first 15-year period. The second stage would start at some point thereafter once funding commitments were acquired. So in terms of that 6,000 CFS staged approach, the obvious questions are, so what does that mean for everything that you were trying to seek as Metropolitan or the state contractors in terms of the benefits of the project? So I put this table together here to kind of show what it would be. So depending on what CVP contractors would still participate in that first stage, we're estimating that Metropolitan would end up picking up as part of the state water contract about 47% of this first stage. Okay, so think about it in terms of how much of what's being built Metropolitan would fund or finance and then receive benefit for. So it would be 47% of roughly 6,000 CFS as opposed to picking up about 30% of 9,000 CFS. Okay, so that's kind of how the math and the numbers would work out. So what does it mean in terms of water supply? An estimated 410,000 acre-feet a year still, because, again, it's a bigger share of a smaller facility, right? It's a bigger share of a smaller facility as opposed to, smaller share of the bigger facility. Works out to be slightly more water. There's still a water quality improvement, albeit, as I'll show you in a second, not as high as with 9,000 CFS of capacity. So salinity will improve about 15%. Bromides will improve about 24% over a baseline without WaterFix, 6,000 CFS. This number is really important, though. The ability of a 6,000 CFS facility to address reverse flows in the delta, which I'm going to tell you is the number one challenge with regard to environmental regulations and protecting fisheries, is the way the current projects create reverse flows within that south end of the delta and basically interfere with fishery migration routes, fishery breeding, et cetera. A 6,000 CFS facility can't fully address the reverse flows, so on average there would still be about 405 CFS of reverse flows in order to operate the 6,000 CFS up north and then still operate the south pumps, as it were. In terms of finances, Metropolitan taking 47% of the cost of a 6,000 CFS first stage would result in about $5.2 billion, right? Really coincidentally close to 31% of that other number, I think was $5.3 billion. That would result in annual costs of about $252 million a year in 2017 dollars on Metropolitan's total cost basis. Marginal cost is slightly higher, just a couple bucks, because of the way the construction works out here. $615 as opposed to $613. $842 treated and delivered in the service area. The rate increase is, this is almost exactly looking like the 31% project. A 1.1% rate increase, $148 on the rate, $2.40 in terms of household impacts. So the staged approach looks a lot like the 31% share of the full project. In terms of water quality, I just wanted to show a comparison here quickly. Just go to the table. The 6,000 CFS, I said, gave a salinity improvement of about 15% and a bromide improvement of about 24%. With a 9,000 CFS facility, the ability to divert more fresh water from the Sacramento River and not from within the delta would have given a 19% improvement or a 31% improvement in bromide. So in terms of water quality, or with salinity, a really important point, the ability to replenish groundwater basins down here or provide a more saline-free source for recycled water, that's an important difference, and that's one of the reasons why 9,000 CFS would be a better project than a first stage of 6,000 CFS over a period of time. So given that, our board asked us to look at what would it take then for Metropolitan to do some sort of financing to ensure that the full project could get done, as opposed to a staged approach. And so our board requested that. So we were looking at financing the unsubscribed shares of the project, right? Because I've described that most of the shares, some of the shares of the project are already taken. In terms of overarching principles, Metropolitan or alternative financing for the full project needs to maintain consistency with the project as approved. That means the project, the service areas, how water is moved through the service area in terms of the environmental analysis. All of those things have to stay consistent. And it's an important point when we talk about whether or not we should look at financing the whole thing. Part of that, an important part, is promoting participation by SWP and CVP contractors, not only to minimize the impacts or make it financially feasible for those contractors, but to keep them involved in the project, right? To keep them involved in the project because they're part of the original project design, to maintain beneficiaries' pay and have benefits go to where costs go, and also minimize financial risk to MWD. The main benefits of the full project, again, top line, reverse flow reduction. Very important to be able to have a facility that can allow us to lay off of South Delta pumping. If we can't do that, we're going to be facing South Delta restrictions and further degradation of that environment out into the future, and that puts the whole project at risk. That's the main point of that. The full project gives more flexible operations, particularly during storms. This weekend, they're getting a storm up north, right, a so-called Pineapple Express or an atmospheric river. That's going to spike the river flows up in this short period of time over the next week or so. 9,000 CFS obviously does better than 6,000 CFS in terms of being able to capture those surplus flows. The project, in being able to deliver more water with 9,000 CFS within environmental constraints, helps with coordination between the SWP and CVP. And so I don't want to pretend that CVP and SWP operations are fully coordinated and friendly and work together well all the time. So these issues where we may find ourselves at odds with each other are minimized by having a joint project with sufficient capacity. Seismic resiliency, 9,000 CFS after an earthquake, and the ability to move water across the delta that may be challenged by broken levees, seawater intrusion, that's much better with 9,000 than 6,000, without question. Climate change adaptation, that's something that people don't talk about an awful lot, but 9,000 CFS of capacity up higher in the delta, out of reach of sea level rise that's projected by climate change scientists, with the ability to capture flashier flows that we expect to see from a warming climate with more rain and less snow. Keep hearing about how we'll see more extreme events. 9,000 CFS is a better adaptation capacity for that as opposed to 6,000 CFS. And then I've already showed you the water quality. There's also some cost savings associated with building the whole thing at once as opposed to staging it over time. So what would we actually be talking about here in terms of financing? Well, I talked about 67% of the project already kind of being subscribed to by the state contractors. There's the unsubscribed 33% from the federal contractor side. What we were saying was the federal contractor side that would be financed by Metropolitan or participating agencies in order to get the whole project built. You'd want to know what the benefits associated with that are. And I want to point out that if Metropolitan or other buyers, we would call ourselves the buyers group if we did this, to buy the 3,000 CFS, the top two lines here on what the benefits of having that capacity and what we would do with operating that capacity are probably tantamount in importance in how this moves forward. First would be a future sale or lease of that capacity back to the CVP participants. That's how it's described as the project in the environmental documentation, right? This project is to serve both projects. So paying for this and taking those water supply benefits just to the state water project side or to Metropolitan is not consistent with how this project was envisioned. So that first two, sale and lease to CVP participants, or wheeling CVP water and water rights to those same participants, and recovering costs, of course, right, would be the first two uses or benefits that we would see out of having that 33% share. Improve water supply reliability for both the state contract and the Central Valley project, and cost reimbursement following those improvements in water supply reliability. And conveyance of transfers. 9,000 CFS gives more ability to move transfers across the delta. We would be able to do that. We're a participant in looking into whether Sites Reservoir, north of Delta, Sites Reservoir storage would be worthwhile for the projects. 9,000 CFS or this 3,000 CFS that would be built could be used to help move Sites Reservoir water that was stored across the delta in more conditions than it would otherwise. So those are the different kinds of benefits. They're not quantified here, but the different kinds of benefits that you would realize from having built and controlling that 33% interest in the full project. In terms of dollars, what does financing that additional 33% mean? So let's go all the way to the left-hand side here, something we call maximum exposure. This would be Metropolitan, with no other buyers, financing that remaining 33% share on top of what it committed to as part of the State Water Project contract, the other side, the 67% share. Part of that plus another 33%. Metropolitan's total participation in the project in terms of financing would be 64.6%. That's what that would mean. Now, that's a lot different than Met building the whole thing, which is what I've been hearing in the paper all the time. That's not what we're saying. It would be financing 64.6%, total capital cost of $10.8 billion, and that's, again, for the whole project. $10.8 billion. That would essentially double, right? That's about right. I said it was about $5 billion before. $10.8 billion gives an annual increase, annually 2.2%, or a total rate increase at the end of 15 years of 33%. The household impact, comparable to that old 240 that I talked about, would be 480, about double. So it's significantly more expensive. This is without any revenue recovery, though, that would come from wheeling or delivering CVP water or them buying back shares. So think of it this way. If those transactions were to take place, the fiscal impact to Metropolitan would be reduced by that revenue that's coming in. And so as we sold either water or capacity at cost, we would reduce that outflow. Even that exposure, I'll say that during when we were doing the finance white papers and all the other information that we gave out in October, that $480 a month is comparable to doing equivalent recycled water at $1,600 an acre foot, or desalinated water would be about $8 an acre foot. I mean, $8 per household per month to develop the same sort of water supply reliability. So even that cost increase is within the range of what we think the alternatives would be out into the future. Let's see. I think I talked about most of this. I do want to point out one thing on this slide, though. In terms of building and financing the whole project, I want to hit on the water supply one more time. You see how under the 6,000 CFS facility, stage 1, I talked about 410,000 acre feet coming from that for Metropolitan? I have it listed here under building the full project and financing 64% of it as the same 410,000 acre feet plus a question mark. And it's really important to understand why that question mark is there. This project was designed to operate within the water rights of both the California State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. So some of these water supply benefits, just by building capacity, can't just take the water supply or the water rights from the joint projects, right? So that's why it's important to remember that transfers or wheeling capacity is probably a more important pursuit of the use of that capacity than thinking about it in terms of we'll just get more water or a bigger share. That's a little bit less clear whether we can just get more water. What will be available, though, is surplus flows. This just kind of draws out where we are in terms of rate impacts for the different options. And again, you can see in October we were looking at a 0.9% rate increase a year. By staging, it would be 1.1% a year. If we built the whole thing and got no revenue back from it, it's about 2.2% a year on the rate increase. So again, comparable. So on Tuesday, our board is going to consider these various options on what Metropolitan's participation would be. And I think it's again going to be a historic discussion in terms of what Metropolitan is going to do in terms of its participation in a statewide project that has statewide benefits, environmental benefits, clear water supply benefits, and what role we're going to take there. They're going to consider two options. One is to support DWR if they decide that a staged approach is the way to go, or authorize participation up to 64%, which would cover the funding gap and enable DWR and the state to probably construct the whole thing, at once as opposed to a phased approach. So that's the decision that our board will be facing there. I have a list of these implementation agreements, but I know I've been talking for a long time here, and I'm sure that there's questions. All I want to say about the implementation agreements is that they're all in place, or we need to get them all in place regardless of what our outcome here is, in order to make sure that our interests are protected, and that would be an agreement with DWR that if we pay for capacity, that we're going to have control over that capacity in terms of setting wheeling rates and whatever. That would be the master agreement. That if anybody is to purchase capacity from us, we'd have a way of describing how that would be done. Who's going to pay for funding before the bonds are issued, gap funding agreements, the Joint Powers Authority agreements that I talked about, what our role of participation is, and our power of voting is in oversight for construction and also for the financing JPAs. And so with that, again, Tuesday, big vote coming out in terms of that discussion. We're looking at these different approaches that I really hope that I was able to kind of draw them out as clear as I could, but it's obviously not that straightforward, that our board will consider whether funding 67% of the full project, consideration of a staged approach, and looking at what those impacts are to us. That's coming up on Tuesday. And with that, I think it'd be a good time for questions.
Don, and then
Yes, a question. Could we get a perspective of how the Met Board is viewing this? I mean, I know you probably made some assessment of what the preference of the board, Met Board might be. You or one of our Met directors give a perspective on what they think is going to happen on Tuesday.
the Metropolitan House bookie against the back wall.
Oh, Brett, there you go. What do you want to know? I mean, I can't predict the outcome of the vote.
What do you think it might, how's it leaning?
I think everyone was, I think a majority of the board was ready to vote for 2 tunnels 2 weeks ago at the workshop. And then things changed, and staff came out and said, well, maybe we'll go the phased approach. And you've had a resurgence of people saying, no, we really want to do both tunnels. So I think it's going to be very interesting on Tuesday. I expect it'll be a close vote.
Brett, if I could add to that, and I think I forgot to say this in the presentation, the main reason for the change from staff's perspective on that alternative financing or paying for the whole thing from 2 weeks ago was the inability to secure upfront commitments from the CVP partners that they would purchase the capacity back after the construction period. So having not been able to secure that guarantee, the risk associated with that financial exposure became higher, and that's where that change in direction came from.
And I'm fine with staff doing that because staff looked at the risk and they looked at it solely on the financial side, and I think they believe we probably can't make that call for the board. If the board wants to make that call, that's fine. From my perspective, personally, as one director with, I don't know, a few votes, I look at the phased approach as being far riskier than doing both tunnels and being able to find people to buy that extra water. I mean, we can concede right off the bat, LA's going to vote against it and San Diego's going to vote against it. Why? Because they're the two that benefit the most. I don't get it, but that's their call. I think Orange County has always been steadfast for 2 tunnels, and that's what we're going to fight for. And I have more faith that we can find the buyers, that the ag folks will come back to the table, because that is an incredibly valuable commodity that they will need to do it. So Met is going to do what we should always do, which is lead the way in California water.
I know this discussion is about finances, but I have a mechanical question. Building 2 tunnels for 9,000 square CFS, if you do it the phased approach, one is doing 6,000 PSF as a CFS. Well, do you have different sized tunnels?
So my understanding is it would be the depth in which they build the pumping plant in the south end of the delta increases the hydraulic grade and allows for more flow through that same 40-foot diameter tunnel.
So it's just a difference in entrance or exit control on,
Yes.
on the pipe, not the capacity thing.
Correct.
On that same mechanical line, is there any ability to do a single tunnel for the 9,000?
Not. That was looked at. I mean, you would have a total tunnel size of like 68, I think it was like 68 feet or 67 feet. 40 feet is definitely within the parameters of successfully executed tunnel projects around the world. 65, 68 feet is outside of that, and so you'd have a construction risk there.
As far as the financing goes, at the end of the 15 years, is the financing starting right at the beginning of the project? Payment or increase in the water costs or current full water? Or is that at the end of 15 years?
So the numbers that I showed you showed what the cost increase would be at the time of completion of the contract, or completion of construction, which would also coincide with when all of the bonds, the 40-year bonds associated with each phase of the construction going forward, have been let out. So you can think of the construction costs kind of ramping up over time. Meeting that is approximately the 1% a year on our rate that we would have to collect to cover those annual increases that would ultimately result in being at collecting 15% at the, right. Yeah. Right, because during that 15 years, we're going to be picking up costs, not the full bonded cost, but as construction takes place and builds up over time.
But if you go with the single tunnel, how does that affect all the CEQA studies that have been completed relative to being able to move forward on a timely basis?
So 2 main points on that. Again, the CEQA analysis is basically a long-term environmental impact analysis. A major portion of that, though, is the construction impacts of building this. So we're not, and this is my mistake for not emphasizing this more clearly, it's the first stage of the full project. It's not a single tunnel, okay? It's the first stage of the full project that was described in the EIR and would be operated ultimately over a longer period of time when the second tunnel is built, operated and delivered consistent with that CEQA documentation. So also kind of think of it this way, at least in that first stage of construction, the construction impacts will be less than what they were described, But, you know, DWR is looking at that now. They've made a statement that they don't think there'd be any additional significant impacts, but they're looking into that, and I think they're expecting in the fall to come out with a supplemental EIR, at least an analysis, to look at that. Brett, did you have a follow-up on that?
I just had a follow-up question. What's the fisheries impact 1 tunnel versus 2 tunnels? And what does it do to all the biops?
Well, you know, I think that's as I've participated and watched this process, I think that's one of the big ironies that comes out in the comments, either from our board members or from the public, is that the reason why 2 tunnels is better than 1 tunnel is because it has better environmental impacts on the delta. It's not because it's bigger, it has more impact. It's because it's bigger, it can address the environmental impacts that are happening because of the water projects. And so the ability to address reverse flows and still maintain water supply reliability is going to be key to the overall ecosystem restoration and recovery of the species that are trying to be protected by these same regulations. So a much better, and I hope I emphasized that earlier, a much better environmental outcome with the 2 tunnels and 9,000 CFS than you'd get under a single tunnel approach.
I have more of a broad brush general question. We definitely need the tunnels to deliver the water to us. Is there anything in the agreements or anywhere that gives NWD a minimum amount of allotment or flow every year, you know, as the rainfall fluctuates from year to year?
Well, guarantee is a tough word, I think, but as part of the tunnels operating within the state water project, and our contract rights to the water that's able to be diverted, given the regulations, and allocated to the state contractors, we'll get that water that way. We also have a right through the contract, the state water contract, to capturing surplus flows, so-called Article 21 water, that's in addition to those project allocations. It's not a guarantee that that water will be there, but the contract gives us a guarantee to access to that water if it is there. And then those capacity agreements and the DWR master agreement in terms of how that additional capacity could be used if we finance the additional 3,000 CFS, that is more of an ironclad guarantee that the benefits that are derived from the use of that capacity will be set and accrued by Metropolitan if we paid for that.
So Brandon, what you're saying is that, because if you have a much bigger tunnel, that you could capture, the big flows when they're there, you could move them into storage and bank them, and then use them when your deliveries are less. So on average, you would have access. Like today, right now, there's 31,000 CFS going through the delta to the ocean. Okay, they only need about 12. If we had the tunnels, we could be taking the full amount in, to the system. Right now, we're taking a tiny fraction of that. So that's the great advantage, that you can pick the peaks up, shave the peaks off, move them into your system. And then with enough storage, and Met has over 5 million acre feet of storage, they could shift it. My question to you, Brandon, is assume you go and do this and the farmers are reluctant to, I don't understand why Westlands would be, and we're talking specifically about Westlands, I guess, why they would be reluctant to participate. But what would happen if MWD took everything they could get out of the state water project and banked their Colorado aqueduct water in Lake Mead? What would the cost effect be to the MWD system if that happened? It would be a little more, because you'd be taking and selling just state water.
Right. I mean,
would you blend that?
I think the cost would probably be blended, ultimately, but you're right. When you do that, you get a bigger benefit by having done the operation that you described.
And that would improve the water quality for down here.
Yep.
All the people who want to do recycling would get lower TDS water. It would be a big boon for us.
Yeah, that's again one point that I'd want to hit on. 9,000 CFS of tunnel capacity from the diversion point on the Sacramento River. There's no saltwater intrusion or mix to that versus what's taken out of the south end of the Delta or on the Colorado River. So each additional CFS or acre foot of water that you can take from there improves your water quality condition in terms of salinity and bromance.
Just a quick question. In the plan, what is the start date of construction and the date of delivery of the water?
It would be, relatively immediately. They were looking towards, the construction schedules were starting in 2019, completing in 2032. For a phased approach, I think it's slightly shorter construction period, but.
If I understood what you said, that if Metropolitan steps up to provide the funding, and the master agreement that I understand and that Metropolitan negotiates much more control and involvement in how the project is designed and its implementation and financing. Is that a correct assumption?
It is, in so much as the participation in the JPAs would be proportional to your participation, your financing commitments. And so, yes, more say in both the design and construction and the finance JPA. The second thing is, through that DWR master agreement, it's more explicit that as we paid for that additional capacity, the control over that capacity, and what I mean by that is, as that capacity is used, say, to wheel water, we'd be responsible for setting the wheeling rate and receiving those revenues, not through DWR. So we would be more likely to be able to recover the costs that we're seeing there.
Right. Brandon, one of the misconceptions is that these tunnels are huge and we're going to suck the delta dry. I think it's important to remind people that the original peripheral canal, as per the design of the State Water Project, was 22,500 CFS, and this is significantly smaller at 9,000. So that's a huge difference.
Yeah, and that, you know, again, I think even after the peripheral canal design, the original isolated facility, what they called isolated facility, that was 15,000 CFS, and that was designed that way because the current pumping capacity at the south end of the delta is 15,000 CFS. 15,000 CFS allows you to totally offset at times that south delta pumping. 9,000 does that to less of an extent, but still successfully. 6,000, I showed you, can't do it without still maintaining south delta pumping and creating reverse flows, which is bad for the environment.
But you didn't say that the tunnels actually could move 15,000 CFS through. They're limited by the size of the intakes and the depth of the pumping lagoon. Right. The state water project coming out of Banks and the federal project are 20,000, not.
Is it 20?
Yeah, it's 20. Going down the.
I'm going to get you that one later.
Okay. So we never built the state water project, you know, to the full intent, you know, to the full capacity. They never authorized putting the last 5,000 CFS of pumps in. Right. And we seldom ever used the 10,000.
That's correct.
So, you know, this is a big improvement. The original, you know, peripheral canal, you know, Brett's correct on 22,000, but they were going to drop water all around the delta into it, so the net was going to be 15,000 coming in. And now we know that would have been disastrous for the fisheries. It would really confuse the fish. And Jerry Merrill, who was the governor's appointee, actually came up with that plan. So just a little trivia.
Go ahead.
I'll go. With the peripheral canal death decades ago, are there any lessons you learned from that in regards to the twin tunnels and all the options that are being talked about? Are any parallels, anything we learned and we shouldn't repeat from back then?
I think there's one parallel that, so the original state water project design had a northern diversion and peripheral canal associated with it, right? The vote in 1983 was really a vote on whether or not you'd float general obligation bonds in order to fund the completion of that project. So think of that parallel into what we're talking about here. If we stage this project, then we run the same risks of not completing the project that we think is going to be most beneficial and designed. So if there's a takeaway, it's to have done your due diligence on what the right project is and then pursue that project.
You know, I see a lot in the news about trying to put people on a water budget, so many gallons per day. And I see a lot of social engineering through water use. And I'm just wondering with the governor, he could just maybe declare a drought or declare something. How would that affect this investment as far as the flow if some kind of declaration is made, even if it doesn't make sense? I mean, could we invest all this and then have the governor just say, no, there's a water budget, I don't want to put it out?
You know, I have a little bit of difficulty with, I don't think even the situation that we just had to do with like restricting the amount of water that you could take from a project. So case in point, when we had the drought emergency, water diversions from the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project were curtailed, but not by gubernatorial action. They were curtailed from the lack of water supply combined with the regulations that are already in place to protect the fisheries. So I hear your question more in terms of, you know, does this project help to achieve water supply reliability in balance with what those future water uses, water budgets are going to be? And I think they work together pretty well. You have more efficient uses of water out in the future and a more reliable supply of water. And I think another thing to think about is that having the capacity and the capability to move the water under these different environmental conditions is important, but don't fall into the trap of thinking that just because it's there, we're going to just keep diverting water even if there's no need for it, right? I mean, I think it all integrates into our operations. I think I hear, some through public comment and whatever, that you have these huge tunnels and this big project and you're going to continue to take water out of the environment. That's not true at all, and our commitment to developing efficient water uses and alternative water supplies and creating a balanced water supply is going to allow us to manage much better in the future to meet, these environmental regulations or future environmental regulations.
I'm curious. A great presentation with all of the numbers, but the one that I find hard to pull out of all of that is what the cost avoidance might be if we built both tunnels at the same time versus building one and then another later.
Yeah. I don't have explicit figures on that. All I'll say is this, right? As you go out in time, the same construction is going to cost you more just by, inflation. Just by inflation. So the mobilization costs of putting together, contracting for the tunnel building machines, for any kind of land acquisition, anything like that you do in 2 phases and pushes some construction out in time, you're going to realize a cost increase for having achieved the same endpoint of 2 tunnels at a later time.
Mayor, I have a question. Wednesday, meetings at
Tuesday.
8 o'clock?
Tuesday at
what?
You're talking about the board meeting?
The board meeting, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be Tuesday, April 10th,
Okay.
and I believe it's 12 o'clock.
When?
12 o'clock.
12 o'clock.
Why 13 years? It seems like an awfully long time to do this thing.
It's an awfully complex project in terms of both tunnels being built. I mean, all I can say, yeah. All I can say is things do take time, and the construction schedule and the plan has been laid out in terms of the number of tunneling machines that they need and how they'd go about that.
What's the maturity of the whole engineering study, end to end, for delivering water into the aqueduct? What's the maturity of the design as you understand it from your search? Tunnels and everything that's required.
Right. That's a little bit out of my range. I'll say I know that a significant amount of work went into, particularly when looking at this second staged approach, into differentiating what those engineering costs and design would be. But certainly one of the things that's going to take place after we get full funding commitment and the project is a go, as opposed to just having been approved, is moving towards final design engineering.
And is there a problem with possible cost overruns if you take one single tunnel or 2 tunnel approach? Is there a balance or something?
That's a good question. I don't know what the differential in cost overrun is, but I do know that in the current, say for the full project design, and actually even for the staged approach, the amount of contingency fund that's in there in the capital cost, so the $16.9 billion includes $4 billion of contingency cost or overrun money, a 33% overrun. Right. Well. And the way that I would think about that is that means that there's a significant chance that you'd come in less than all of the numbers that I'm showing you because those are contingency. Right. Correct.
We have room for one more question.
I'm very curious if the fact that we could accelerate the construction, will there be savings in that? Is that even a possibility? Yeah. We've seen a lot of other projects when they were given incentive to the contractors that the costs come down appreciably.
I wouldn't know. I would assume that would be the case, but I would also assume that the construction schedule is laid out in a way that's doable and practicable, given what the budget is.
Well, we want to thank you, Brandon, and also the Metropolitan directors. We have heard information here that the Board of Metropolitan has not heard yet. So this is a privilege, and we thank you for doing that. You have any other question?
Just a final statement, if I can. So, Charlie Wilson is the Southern California Water Coalition. There are things that we've been engaged in this issue dating back to 1982, which was pointed out here, which is the last time we actually had an opportunity like this to provide water reliability to Southern California. As Director Barbery, a couple of questions came up. Lessons learned. 1982, Southern California didn't know the importance, and they didn't act, and we lost. The most important thing you can do going into next Tuesday, every person in this room, you need to make the silent majority heard. That Metropolitan Board needs to know that they are supported. We've done public opinion polling on this. Over 2/3 back in October of Southern California support this project. The last Public Policy Institute of California poll showed 83% on the incline support this project, particularly in Los Angeles and Angelenos. And yet, as you heard from Brett, there are members of the Los Angeles delegation considering a no vote. Unless you make your voice heard, it may go down. Do not take this for granted. Our delegation at MODOC has declared their support for this project. But people in Los Angeles, Compton, Pico Rivera, Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, Pasadena, across the territory, this is not a sure thing. I have seen a small minority of people over the last 6 months try to stimulate opposition by clouding the issue, obfuscating facts, sometimes outright lying. Unless you act, they can't necessarily say we are supported by the public. You need to demonstrate. Go to SoCalWater.org if you need help. But every agency, city, non-governmental organization, down to you as individuals, make sure that Metropolitan has your voice so that they can stand on Tuesday and make the right call. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie. That's the Southern California Water Coalition. The meeting is over. Thank you for your attention, and come back next month.